Hi,
Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
You've asked what?
welcome to the People's Venereal Transmission podcast.
Right, I'm gonna cut that out. Good, good.
I assume that's what PVT stands for.
Yeah,
So every time
you
I
know what,
crash,
you
every
know
time I
what.
crash one of these, I'm going to basically come up with a new explanation for the acronym if I can.
Good.
But yeah, feel free to cut them out. I reckon eventually I'll get it.
I doubt it. Um,
So Tebow, is it is it fair to say, Tebow and Stuart, that one of the reasons that we joined your company, Stuart, is that IQM was plateauing, had maybe lost a little bit of direction?
Um, I wouldn't. It's difficult to say that it's lost direction. Um, it's it very much had one direction that it was going in. Um, but I guess the analogy is that let's put it like this: it was a ship, right? Barely that had no sails, broken rudder. There was someone up in the crow's nest sailing around in a very small pond, a niche pond. Um, about it, really. That's how I would describe it.
So something you came to the realization that something had to change for it to progress, if you like.
No, I didn't come to that realization. An opportunity presented itself to
Okay.
me. I thought, yep. Had I not, we would continue to do what we do. I should imagine there would have been as is often the way, there would have been a turnover of staff over a certain period of time. Um, a lack of progression in the business. Um, and yeah, we would have carried on going.
Okay.
so if we sort of skip past that part, um, once we had decided to Mark and I join the business, um, one of the first things that we looked at were sort of the operating practices and how much we understood of what people were working on, how much time projects were taking, how much time we were investing in different customers, into different projects, etc., products. And I think we relatively quickly came to the conclusion that we didn't really know. And so a lot of the stuff that we did early on and that we spent a lot of time calibrating was putting in place all of these agile practices, with introducing ClickUp that you were really excited about, Stuart, and putting in place more structured processes when it came to work management, doing sprints with the whole team rather than having one product owner managing a product on their own. Um, what would both of you? Sorry.
I was just, if I may come back on some of that,
Yeah, go on.
I would say, you know, I'd say the biggest changes that happened weren't necessarily putting in things like ClickUp because we were already using project management. It was there was just a fundamental shift. Bringing in two new people with quite radical ideas, or not even radical, but just who wanted to change things and who were looking at these, like say, operational processes and going, okay, right, this is the way we're going to move it forward. The way that we're managing our projects in Right, the actual tasks that we do in ClickUp aren't that different to the way we were doing it in Right. It's just that it's being done now. Like there is an accountability. We can no longer get away with not putting it in or not not keeping it up to date, because you as a strategic lead, you're using it to know what everybody's doing. And
some of that was in place, and some people followed it and some people didn't, so it was inconsistent.
yes, I'd say, because there was nobody acting as a strategic lead, if in that sense. I was sort of, I would make technical decisions, or sort of project-based decisions, or with regards to where we might go as a business. But like Thibaut said, we looked at it and we didn't actually know what was going on. I couldn't have told you what they were working on specifically at all. The other sort of PAs, because they were in a little world of their own. And my only requirement was that they were managing their stuff in Reich, so that the business could have a rough idea of how much time we're spending on doing this stuff. Whereas now, the way we do it, we've got a roadmap that's planned out for months in advance. I would say that was probably one of the biggest impacts. The team working as a team thing, rather than everybody just being on their own product, is obviously a relatively new thing that we've only sort of started probably properly doing sort of this year, maybe end of last year.
Yeah, November.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of the discussions that we had early on was how come that people aren't using Reich? How come people aren't currently putting stuff in? And I remember one of the things that I said is, if people don't get value out of it or don't see why it's useful, it's not going to work. And this is something that we also see when we speak to customers, is they put in place this new piece of software and it's not getting used or it's not getting adopted. Well, why is that? Because the people who are supposed to put stuff in the system don't get anything out of it. So we had this discussion of how do we make sure the team also gets something out of it. And I think these team sprints and the stand-ups were an important part of that, to say, if I'm managing a sprint, I need to understand what the team's working on. And if I don't have a system to get that information out of, it's going to make my job a lot harder. So it's not only me as a strategy lead holding people accountable, at least I hope so. It's also people themselves getting some value out of it, or at least seeing what the value is a bit more. Stuart?
1, I've got to go. 2, I totally agree. 3, I think definitely that last point, as people have started using it now, for example, Sam has started working in a way that's very similar to mine, and he was resistant at first, but now that he's seen it, and he's like, oh, actually, managing my week like this is amazing. So yes, it has been basically a process like that. Right, I've got to go because I need to speak to Gerard.
Thank you.
Peace out.
So I think to a certain extent it's making sure that people really adopt the practices that you put in place, and you can't do that by forcing them to do by the book processes that you just apply from somewhere else. It just doesn't work. It needs to be sort of adapted to the way they like to work, even if it is just to give them the impression that it is adapted to them. And in the end it turns out to be very much similar to what you've done before. But most of the stuff that we've put in place, both with Woohoo and with IQM, have evolved over time. And we've rationalized very, very clearly to the team every time why we put certain processes in place. And if they don't do what we want them to do, we adjust them. And if we realize there are other things that we want them to do, and we don't have a process for that, then we create a new one. And so the process that we've got in place with IQM and the process that we've got in place with Woohoo are sort of unique, each to the organization that we're working in, and they fulfill the purpose and the need that we have for those systems.
I think there's a few things there, because what we're talking about is change, isn't it? Is implementing change. Now, I have experience of some organizations where someone decides, quite often the management decide, that this thing isn't fulfilling their requirements, so they're going to change it. And then normally they decide what that is going to be changed to, whether that's a new piece of software, new piece of help desk software or whatever, and then they say at this date everybody is changing over to this new thing. Now, change is actually quite challenging for people because they are quite often people are in their comfort zone, arguably stuck in their comfort zone, and they don't have to think too much outside of that, and they're just carrying on and getting their job done. So anything that changes that can cause extra work, or can be perceived as being a right pain or a hassle. I think what you're describing in terms of this agile kind of way of managing change is that yes, you do initially have to change the ethos, if you like, of what you're doing, because we've changed the ethos of the company in terms of that change. But then once you've got that methodology in place, instead of things changing drastically, you are able to have a process of tweaking, if you like, over time and adjusting, which is really interesting because in theory, I think that then means that you don't often have to do big changes anymore. You have these constant feedback loops, and people making proposals. It seems to me as well to be much more inclusive if the process is implemented correctly as well. So yes, I think you've used it before, this term about regular course corrections, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, because if we look practically at what we've done with IQM, is we had an idea of where we wanted to go, where we wanted to get the business, right? Um, and so we had a reasonably clear vision of where we would end up, but we started with something really basic. Now, arguably for the team, it was a big step to go into the
Yeah.
Scrum process, to work in sprints, do daily stand-ups, do a review, retro, and planning. But that was a relatively small change that was coupled with the transition to ClickUp, which actually was a really, really good one because it got everybody super excited. Um, being this super versatile tool that everybody could customize to whatever they wanted. Yep.
But I think partly on that ClickUp thing as well is that we had that workshop to choose the new tool, and we captured the requirements of everybody in the business. Okay, that's easier in a small business like IQM, but it meant, I think, that everybody had an active choice and they were able to feed into that process, so that when we did make that change, which was a good change, and in fact it was the most junior member of our team that actually suggested ClickUp, which was fantastic. So the most junior member of our team suggested the tool that we've all moved to and that has revolutionized the business and our project management working practices. So that obviously, I think, increases that buy-in, which means people are much more likely to use that tool because it's been a logical joint decision rather than someone saying you need to use this tool. So I think that's another big advantage of the process we did.
Yeah, I was trying to find if I had the photo still of those 2 or 3 whiteboards that we filled out with everybody's requirements for this project management process. And
Was that
we subdivided that into 2 or 3 working groups to solve a particular issue. So we had a tool issue, we had a process issue,
yes?
and so everybody contributed to that, and everybody was able to give their input, even if afterwards we decided to do something else. But so we put in place this tool, ClickUp. We put in place these basic Scrum processes, and over time we've standardized the way that we manage different projects within ClickUp. We've adapted the way that we run our reviews and our plannings and our stand-ups to suit flexi time and people's reluctance to come to meetings. We've added governance meetings to deal with roles and responsibilities. Um, we've put in place a properly structured roadmap, which wasn't the case before, which we review on a regular basis. We've put in place practices of linking tasks to user stories that we present to the customer when we do a release planning, and then when we do a release presentation, we link those tasks to items in the roadmap so that we know how much effort. We even link those items to deals in the pipeline to represent how much effort we're spending on different things. We've put in place all of these satisfaction things, so to make sure that people are having fun. So we measure people's excitement about tasks, which is linked to the fact that we now also categorize tasks to know what type of work they are, which we didn't do in the beginning. So all of these processes that we've put in place are reasonably complex now. And it's going to be interesting when we onboard the sysadmin, the new sysadmin, to see how easy it is to pick up this finished product.
Yes.
Um,
When you say finished product,
Well, what I mean is it's now more mature than it was
yes,
when we put it in
it's
place
mature product.
initially.
Absolutely.
But I think this is the kind of stuff that I also talk about with other people when they ask about, oh, how do you put in place an agile process and all of that stuff. You build in that agility early on. Is the ability to adjust and to learn from what you've done and improve it. That's the most important bit. Is basically if you've got that retrospective in whatever process you put in place. So the fact that at the end of we do every week, at the end of a week, you can question some of the stuff that we do and say, this doesn't work for me, or I'm missing this, and I propose that we do this new thing. And you can iterate quickly, and then the next week, if somebody else really hates what has been put in place, you can remove it again. But putting that, I think that's the single most important thing, is this regular heartbeat of adjusting, micro adjustments. And for the first months, we would have 2 or 3 changes every week. And I think now it's been probably a month or 2 where we've had maybe 1 or 2 changes at most.
Yeah.
So, and it will change again, in the nature of the business, when people join, when people leave, when the nature of the projects that we are working on change, when personal...
We'll have to change the systems to adapt to the dynamic environment.
Exactly. So, as long as those principles are adhered to, that we put in place, which I think we're sort of the guardians of, if you will, that it doesn't completely go sideways. And, we still get questions of, when can I raise this? When can I bring up this idea that I have? Is this a governance tension, or should it be in the retrospective, or should it be in the stand-up? So you need to have these sort of champions who at least have a vision, maybe don't entirely understand how it works, but at least have a vision of where it should be going. But I think, when we look back at 9 months ago, where we were then, and how much information we had to base our decisions off, and now where we stand now, I mean, it's a world of difference. And we're still not 100% where I'd like us to be. But it's a massive, massive difference.
There is, and you can see that as the business grows, this sort of system is flexible, because that's one of the other things. If you have a one size fits all system that works with a group of 7 people, if you are successful, which is great, and the business grows, this system, agile project management, is much more likely to be able to flex as more and more people join the business. So theoretically, the extra time that you might have to do to put this process in place over a system where it's like, you are doing this now, I think it takes longer. I would suggest that it takes longer, but once this kind of flexible system is embedded, then I think it will be save so much time in the future with changes that need to be made.
So I know that you've put this or something similar to this in place with some of the people that you mentor in terms of managing a backlog, sprint pointing out some tasks, managing a bit sort of the work that they do in sprints as well. What would you say is either the first thing that you do with them or the most important thing that you do with them?
I mean, first thing that I would do, so to give a kind of concrete example, my brother was looking to transition um, from a car mechanic to try and move into another business. He wasn't completely sure what that was initially. So for me, it's finding out information about that person, about their goals, about what drives them, about what their motivation, so I can get an idea of what direction they want to move into. And I think often people kind of have a range of things that they know they need to do, if you like, but it's not organized or prioritized in any way whatsoever, or even visualized. So it's a jumble of things in their head. Some people can quite successfully, actually, without any project management software, do a load of stuff and prioritize and get stuff done and be successful. Fine. But I think for most people, to be using, for example, a Kanban type board, which I find really useful because it's visualized and I can move things physically from one place to another and I can add information to these kind of sections. I think that initially helps you to, it's like post-its, isn't it? It's like post-its on a board. It enables you to create some concrete things and then move them around. So it enables you to sort things initially into categories. Then it enables you to prioritize those things. And if you have had that discussion about particular goals that that individual might want to be working towards, that also helps with that prioritization process. And then actually, I mean, we were using Trello boards, which is much simpler. Although it does have some extra functionality, it's simpler than ClickUp. Very quickly, actually, you can create this board which you're then able to have a deeper discussion about, and you're able to move things around and sort through ideas and come to conclusions. So those were the first kind of stages.
That's really interesting because actually I think for me, when I'm working with external teams, if you will, whether they're customers or whatever, is very much the same thing. The first thing, the most important thing is this prioritization. So it's making the work visible, right?
Yeah,
It's writing down in whatever
yeah,
form they take. I like cards too. Um, in whatever form it takes, what work needs to be done, even if it's on a very high level, and then quite ruthlessly prioritizing. Because being honest with yourself that you can never work on two things at a time. So you always need to pick one thing to be more important than another, and
yeah.
putting them in this vertical list of saying, these are all the things that I need to work on, and that's the most important one.
So you're talking two projects rather than two tasks, aren't you, in effect,
No,
potentially?
same thing.
No? Okay.
Same thing.
So you're talking about even theoretically going down to a microscopic level. I've got these two tasks in this project. Which one is the next one that should be done?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing often for customers or teams or whoever I talk to, is getting that order of where should I invest my effort, because people spread their effort massively and become a lot less effective at everything.
Yes.
So I think that's sort of the main gain also that we see at IQM, is actually starting something, putting 2 or 3 weeks of work into it, and then finishing it.
Completing something within a reasonable time scale and getting it signed off, and then moving on to the next thing.
And the ones that are causing frustration are the ones that we don't manage to tick off and finish, and that drag on and drag on. So like I said, we also don't have it dialed in or perfect or whatever, but doesn't mean that we can we shouldn't be doing it, and it also doesn't mean that we can't help other people to get into the right direction.